brother.
This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the May 18th edition of the DRF Players Podcast, show 239. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatal, back with you, not coming to you from the Brooklyn bunker today, but coming to you from the Silver Lake bunker, where we've hosted many of these shows periodically, typically on the Thursday or Friday before big contests at Santa Anita, like we have this weekend. Muggsy, the handicapping Labrador, is on vacation. You may, however, hear meowing in the background Vinny, the handicapping cat. So if you hear any strange sounds, that's probably what's going on. Joined today, as always, by my co-host on this program. You know him as the People's Champion. He is Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
I'm just trying to get out there next to you. I'm in cloudy Austin, Texas at the moment, but I think at this time tomorrow I'll be in sunny California ready to attack the Eddie Logan the Santa Anita contest.
I will keep a seat warm for you at the in the Eddie Logan suite. I don't think actually I'm going to get over there today. It may be another one of my eat my way across Los Angeles days with Louise Leonard that often become such good prep for a focused weekend of work and fun out at Santa Anita. We are joined today by a very special guest. He is the director of Bloockstock and assistant racing manager at Winstar, coming to us from the Breeze Show in Maryland. He is Sean Tugel. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate the invitation to come and have a chat with you and Jonathan, and hopefully I'll learn something from the two of you and can maybe make some money on Friday and Saturday out of Pimlico.
That's the plan anyway. Let's start before we dive into these loaded, stakes-laden cards on Friday and Saturday, just by hearing a little bit of background about you, Sean, how you got into the business. Let's start with that.
Well, I am originally from Western New York, and I claim Finger Lakes Racetrack is where I got my start. My father was a veterinarian there for many, many years and still participates there, and I guess that's where I found my love for horses, and I've been in Kentucky for 14 years now.
Fantastic. In terms of getting your actual start, your first job, it seems like everyone we have on the show, it comes to us through one of two paths. It's either my team working at the Saratoga Special, the newspaper up in Saratoga, of course, or they're part of the Darley Flying Start program. Or did you come from one of these streams, or did you sort of work your way into the business another way?
I came through pure, simple hard work and sweat, and started out rubbing horses at Finger Lakes in the summer times, and then ventured off to Kentucky and got into the breeding game there, and was always still highly involved in the racing end, and spent 7.5 years at Hillendale, which was fantastic. Unbelievable horse flesh they have there, and great stallion roster. And then made my way to Winstar, where I've been now for coming up on 6 years this August.
Fantastic. And let's talk about your current position as director of Bloockstock and assistant racing manager. What is a lot of your day-to-day in that role?
A lot of my day-to-day is really just keeping a beat on what's going on in the industry. Whether it's looking for fillies to add to our broodmare band, claiming, or if it's stallion sales with our stallions. Right now, the breeding season, we've had another extremely successful breeding season. We have some very exciting stallions on our roster. Obviously, we have our elite stallions of Tisnow and Distorted Humor and Pioneer the Nile. But we have exciting young horses like Bodemeister, the sire of Always Dreaming. This past season, we welcomed first foals of Carpe Diem, Constitution, Daredevil, and Commissioner. They all have fantastic first foals. And then, of course, we had some very exciting new stallions this season, like Exaggerator, to add to hopefully keep leading the list of leading breeders for us in the nation.
How much do you use handicapping in your job as opposed to your horsemanship background?
I would say handicapping is a huge part of what I do. Not only because when you're looking for certain fillies and their ability, but also stallions, you're constantly handicapping the races and looking for the next big talent. So I actually rely on handicapping for probably 65 to 70% of what I do.
Oh, that's very interesting. We've seen some interesting examples of how handicapping and certain handicapping techniques have impacted the breeding industry. I did a handicapping session last night, which folks, if they're interested, can find on YouTube, drf.com/YouTube, Preakness handicapping session with me, Andy Beyer, and Andy Serling. And one of the things that Andy Beyer mentioned was he was talking about the stallion career of McLean's music and how the gaudy buyer that McLean's music earned in, I guess, what turned out to be his only career start is more or less the reason that he has a stud career. Is that the type of data you're looking at, speed figures and things like that when it comes to handicapping?
I think speed figures, and there's many different speed figures that are out there, and I think you just tend to gravitate towards the one that you find to be the most useful or the easiest for you to use. And we definitely rely on speed figures, and we look at the cross section of all the different figures, whether it be buyer numbers, whether it be Ragozin or Thorograph numbers. It's a great way to, I guess, compare and decipher the level of talent that the future stallions and colts possibly have, and what we'd like to go after.
That makes sense. JK, before we start diving into these races, do you have a question or two for Sean?
No, I just wanted to welcome Sean. Obviously, it was a lot of fun. The first time I got to meet Sean was Nick Tamero and Travis Stone and I were lucky enough to get over to Winstar, and Sean kind of gave us the run of the land, and what a phenomenal place that is. It couldn't be a bad place to wake up every morning and go to work at. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen, and I'm glad we could have him on. I got to spend a couple of mornings with Sean at Churchill leading up to the Derby, and he's got a really great opinion. He's got a really good opinion of horse flesh and how horses are kind of coming into races, and he's got a real good perspective when it comes to the ownership side of things, and I think that's really important. We talk about that on the show as often as possible, is understanding the story, like why is a horse here, and it can kind of help you understand a little bit more about how the race is going to be run. So I'm excited for the listeners to have a chance to hear some of Sean's opinions, and I can guarantee there's a race on Saturday we'll be on the same horse.
That's a great point, Jonathan, you make. We spend a lot of time on this show and in handicapping in general talking about trainer angles. But Sean, I'm going to assume you're going to agree with this statement, but it seems to me that there are times where you can find owner and breeder angles that have every bit the power of trainer angles. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, some of with us as we're always trying to make that next stallion or get that little bit of black type on a mare or filly, that's something that we are really cognizant of where to run horses that can either achieve, for example, a horse like Battle Midway, who we bought going into the Kentucky Derbies. He's just such an exciting stallion prospect, possibly being one of the last really good smart strikes. He's out of a grade 1 winning mare. Now he's multiple graded stakes place, multiple grade 1 place. And I think you may see him come back in a grade 3 out in California. And that's something that we are cognizant of is we can bring him back in a grade 3. And if he becomes a stakes winner, a graded stakes winner, he's a certified stallion now that we can put in our stallion barn. So there's lots of times where we're looking at angles of where we can run a horse that can achieve what our end game is of building a really high-end world-class broodmare band full of stakes horses, and then of course having one of the most influential stallion rosters in North America.
This question's a bit of a non sequitur, but I have to satisfy my curiosity, and I think you're somebody who could offer a really good perspective on it. The last couple of years, we've had these 3-year-old fillies early in the year who've looked to be, at the time, the best of their generation, talking about Songbird, talking about Unique Bella. from a breeding and owning perspective, because you'll always hear racing fans, oh, they should go for the Derby, they should go for the Derby. In terms of actual money in the industry, what is the incentive to push your 3-year-old filly to go for a race like the Derby instead of the Oaks? Is it worth something in terms of the breeding side of the business, or is it more just all about the emotional value of being able to have your horse in the Derby?
Well, I mean, it's a two-pronged kind of attack. Everybody wants to win the Derby, and if you have a filly that is good enough and potentially wins the Derby, I mean, that's like a rare gem, and that's really, you can't really put a price on that. But as far as, if you have a filly that wins the Kentucky Oaks or the Kentucky Derby, they're still a classic winner, and they still have achieved the highest racing achievement. So I see where a lot of people come from, not pushing them early in the year to run against colts, because there is a maturity, I don't want to say issue, but there's, it takes, that's why 3-year-old colts really don't run against older horses towards the end of the year either. There's, a lot of these horses in the springtime, they're technically probably not even 3 years old. So, and fillies tend to maybe mature a little bit longer than colts. It takes them time to fill out and muscle up, and you run them against the boys, it takes a lot out of them. And last thing you want to do is test them too early in the year and then not have a really good filly for the back end of the year that then you can kind of dump into the deep waters. That's my opinion on it.
That makes perfect sense to me. I figured you might have an interesting perspective on that one. All right, gentlemen, let's start talking about some racing. We don't typically do Friday races on the show because typically we're broadcasting on Friday, but our schedules this week enabled us to do this Thursday show. So my thought is that we'll look through these stakes races pretty quickly on Black-Eyed Susan Day so we can leave plenty of time to talk about the Preakness. I imagine there'll be many listeners tuning in to this pod when they normally listen to it, and these races will be happening or have already happened. So I don't want to necessarily go too deep into Black-Eyed Susan Day, but I don't want to ignore it since we have this opportunity. So JK, we're going to start, you're going to sort of be the ringleader here in going through these stakes races on Friday and Saturday. We'll get Sean to chime in at times, and the couple of horses from my my watch list that I'll be underlining as well as we go through. But really, I want to get your opinion starting on Friday with the 5th race, the Grade 3 DuPont Distaff. Where are you going in here?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple spot for me. I think if you look at the Timeform US Pace Projector, you see the horse. We've talked about this before, and I've been wrong sometimes, but I'm never going to change how I approach situations like this. When I see a horse that I think is best on paper, who has a pace advantage, who is loose on a race where they figure the pace projector thinks is going to favor a horse that's on or near the lead, it's just an easy single for me. And if I get beat, I get beaten. So Terra Promessa for me. Jose Ortiz obviously will ride the filly forward like he did last time in the Apple Blossom. Got beat by what's arguably the best older mare in the country and Stellar Wind in that race. I just don't think these horses are good enough. And I think Terra Promessa will be an easy single. And I also think it's probably part of the reason this filly shows up, or this race shows up 5th on the card rather than being a little bit later. It's pretty straightforward.
When you talk about Terra Promessa as a single, JK, how do you approach that? Are you looking to get alive to Terra Promessa in the pay leg, playing the 3rd, 4th, and 5th races, or are you thinking more about just stone cold single in all the verticals starting here, which include, I think, the pick 3 and I'm not sure what else there. I think there's a double as well. So how are you gonna approach that?
Yeah, it's something that my game's kind of like changed a little bit over time, where I used to love finding singles like that in the pick 4 or the pick 5, the late pick 5 or the pick 6 or whatever. But I've gotten to the point now where it's like if I can find a single anywhere in the card, then I'll build around that. So, I'll look at the 4th race and see if I have an opinion in the turf allowance race that's the 4th. I'll look if I have an opinion in the 6th. I usually like to bet into my singles because I think there's a little bit more value into them, because a flash of the tote board and the horse shows up at 3 to 5, then everyone's going to use that double coming out. I like to kind of go into it because I think only sophisticated bettors look into the probables of what the double's going to pay. And so, I'll look anywhere. I'll look at if I find a single, next thing you know, I'll be handicapping the 2nd, which is the early pick 5, and see if I can find something there. So I don't care where one shows up. I just try to build around it.
I think that's smart. You let the races tell you what the bet is. You don't say, okay, I'm going to just make this automatic bet because I like this horse as a single. Sean, anything to add on the DuPont Distaff?
I agree with Jonathan. I do think Terra Promessa is probably one of the top 5 fillies, older fillies in the country. Was unlucky. We can go over her trip back at Oaklawn 2 back and was unlucky to not win that race. And look, she was beaten by, as Jonathan said, probably arguably the best older filly minus Songbird going right now in Stellar Wind. Agree, she probably will be on the lead and should have the perfect trip and setup. I do find it interesting with Shug putting the blinkers on Carumba with Castellano. To me, that's probably the only other filly that can maybe get close to Terra Promessa, but she's probably the best single of the 2 days, possibly.
Race 7 is the Pimlico Special. Shaman Ghost sure looks to have an advantage on paper in this group. Jonathan, what's your approach to this year's Pimlico Special?
Well, it's a little cloudy in here from all this dust, but if I was playing, or if and when I'm playing the pick 4, pick 5, whatever it is, this is a single A, single C situation for me. Okay, we talk about that all the time with using TRF Ticket Maker. You can have an A, a B, or a C horse. This would be a single A and a single C. I'm the single A Shaman Ghost. The horse is just better than these horses on paper. Mile into 3/16, obviously in that horse's wheelhouse. I think the longer the better for him. And then the second horse that I'm going to use just a little bit defensively, I think there'll be a little bit of value, is Eagle. I think Eagle's always ultimately wanted to run farther distances. I thought that he was against the track a little bit at Keeneland in the Ben Ali. I don't want Watershed in this spot. When I was against Watershed thinking he didn't want to go that far and he ran well enough, now he's going even further. I'm going to stick to my guns about him not wanting to run that far. And so for me, it's Shaman Ghost as a single A, and I'll save a little bit with Eagle at a price.
We had a question, actually, Jonathan. This is as good a time to do it as any. Somebody wanted to know what we mean when we say we're going to use a horse defensively. How does that manifest itself in the actual writing of your tickets?
Well, this is an idea that I think is brilliantly illustrated by Mike Maloney, and hopefully the world will be able to see that soon when he starts to publish some of those ideas. But essentially what it is that you have a strong opinion, and you want to lean on that strong opinion, but in a defensive way. You think, if my opinion is wrong, what is likely to happen, and how can I bet it where I can break even or lessen the damage that I've taken on the strong opinion that I had. And so that's pretty much what it is I think that Shaman Ghost is going to win. If anyone ever asked me, I'd say Shaman Ghost is going to win, but I'm going to use Eagle defensively because at a price, if he does win, that could be something that could get me out on my original opinion of Shaman Ghost being the most likely winner. So it's just using it defensively. You're not using them in the same, if you're going to bet $100 to win on Shaman Ghost, and using Eagle defensively would be to bet $15 to win on him and or back wheeling him in an exacta or something like that.
Yeah, you could use a defensive strategy in either the verticals or the horizontals. Just to use this very specific example, we talked about Terra Promessa in the 5th race. We skipped over the 6th race, the non-stake. But let's just say that means you have whatever it happens to be, a $10 pick 3 starting with Terra Promessa, paying off to Shaman Ghost, maybe a $1 defensive backup pick 3 going to Eagle. Sean, what do you think about the Pimlico Special?
Well, also again here you have the 4 to 5 Shaman Ghost, who on paper looks to be towering over everyone. He's got gaudy buyer numbers. He is high weight, but I don't think that will make much difference. And he definitely wants the distance. But I have a horse in here who's 15 to 1, who I saw breeze at Keeneland this past Sunday, Conquest Windy City, who is doing really, really well for Brendan Walsh, who this will be his 3rd start since going into the new barn. I do think he has a very tactical, he might be on the lead. His last race was really visually impressive at Keeneland, and he really couldn't be doing any better. And here's another angle is, originally they were going to go to Lone Star for a great stakes race there, but the horse was doing so good, and they brought him here. So he's a horse tis now. He'll get the distance for sure out of an AP Indy mare who is a full sister to a really high class horse, Jumpstart. this horse for me, he may not win the race, but I think he's got a huge chance to hit the board.
That scribbling you hear is me and JK making a note to at least include Conquest Windy City defensively. We'll try to speed round the rest of these Friday stakes. And so we could obviously, so fun talking about racing, you could spend the whole show on the Friday card here. Race 8's the Hilltop. Sean, do you have a quick pick or a particular item of interest you're looking at in the Hilltop?
Not particularly. It's a race that I think is pretty wide open. There's nobody, in my opinion, that really jumps out as a horse that other than Victory to Victory, who has a lot of back class there, maybe compelled a little bit for Tom Proctor.
We might have lost Sean there for a second. Hopefully we'll get him to reconnect. JK, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here. I thought Sean was just done. Sean, you there?
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah.
Who do you like in the Hilltop, Jonathan?
I think Sweeping Patty is one that might make people think, ooh, that's kind of interesting. Ran really well against La Cornell, but I think if we talked about it before, the outside of that turf course on Derby weekend was good, and that horse found himself in that path, or herself in that path quite a bit. I've been a compelled fan since Saratoga. I know the owners in the barn have always liked the horse. I thought that horse, the race that she ran at Gulfstream Park West, I've been waiting for her to kind of get back to that, and I think she will. And it's kind of a home game for Proctor. They run a lot of races up there, and so for me, it's compelled.
Friend of the podcast, Craig Bernick, getting in on the action there. Let's go on to the Miss Preakness Stakes. Jonathan, who's your selection?
Oof, wow, this is like a crazy tough race. For the sake that I think that Sean's going to talk about Bodie's Dream, I'm going to skip that one. And I'm interested in Pretty City Dancer a little bit. I know that last time people thought that that's kind of what she's always wanted to do, is go one turn, the cutback and the 8 bells. It was a sloppy track. We've talked about how the inside was good the entire time. Going into the far turn, she was in the 4 path, then the 5 path, and she finished in the 6 path. She missed the break a little bit. If Julian can kind of get her out of the gate and have her in a good position, I think she's one that could definitely have an impact at hopefully what is 6-1 of the morning line. But I'm a little bit concerned that price will come down a little bit. Our Majesty looks like she might be really darn good, though, so I would keep an eye out for her.
Sean, is JK predicting correctly that you've got some stuff to say about Bodie's Dream?
Well, we're hoping for a big weekend for Bodie Meister this weekend, and he just had American Anthem, who came back and was his second grade stakes winner. Obviously, he had the Derby winner and Bodie's Always Dreaming. This Bodie's Dream was actually his first stakes winner last year when she won the Astoria. She's doing good. She's going to have to step it up, though. But, boy, when's the last time you were able to get Castellano and Pletcher at 12-1 morning line?
Definitely one to keep in mind on what could be a very big weekend for Bodie Meister. Let's move on to the Jim McKay Turf Sprint. Sean, we'll start with you with a quick thought on this one.
I'm going to root for Ben's Cat. What a cool story. He's 11 years old. Maryland's his home. He's won this race multiple times. I'm going to have a sentimental pick here with Ben's Cat.
Now, a man who's never sentimental is Jonathan Kinchin. What are your start with your thoughts on Ben's Cat, and then segue into your pick for the Turf Sprint, assuming it's not him.
Good for Ben's Cat. I hope he gets around there safe, and I hope that he runs well. I won't be betting him, so I hope he doesn't win. But good for him. Good for the connections. What a cool horse and what he's accomplished. Look, this is not a fanboy selection. This is not a friendship selection. But I'm going to play Pay Any Price. That horse is fast, and although he is partly owned by the Matisse brothers, and I know that Duke is skipping the Preakness contest at Santa Anita to head out to Pimlico to be there for that one. But here's one of the reasons why, if you're a handicapper and you have some extra money laying around, you should buy horses, because you can do smart things like these guys did. And what they did is they get this horse who was in for $10,000 at one point. They win a stakes race, and then as a prep for this race, they run him in a starter allowance race and pick up a free $26,000 and get an easy prep into him. And now they show up in a $100,000 stake. I think that this horse is super, super fast. Richard's Boy makes a ton of sense, but I'm going to use I selectively use this, but I'm going to say he's not going to run as well coming back from Dubai.
All right, interesting stuff there. Let's go on to the featured race on Friday, the Black-Eyed Susan. JK, will keep it with you.
Wow, this is a tough race. I mean, like, usually when I look through a field, I say, this horse is probably going to win, and then I try to get creative or whatever. I couldn't really do that. I'm going to go with the local horse and Shimmering Aspen down on the rail. Back-to-back wins by 3 lengths and 7 lengths. The trainer is familiar with his surroundings. The jockey's familiar with his surroundings. The figure last time was well. And for me, I can't really get in anything else. I think Tappa 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 makes a little bit of sense, but on figures alone, that horse makes the most sense to me.
It is a loaded-looking running of the Black-Eyed Susan. Sean, where did you land in here?
I kind of agree with Jonathan there. Tappa Tappa Tappas I find very interesting, and those moves down at Tampa before Tim Ham, who is based out of Ohio, moved her up to Pistol for last breeze. We're very good over a track that is quite deep. She's a horse that it looks like Shimmering Aspen will have to go to the lead, but Tappa 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 looks quite interesting to me. I kind of want to give Dancing Rags another look going 2 turns. I think the 7 furlong race at Keeneland was just a setup race for her, and she just fired a bullet at Fair Hill for where Grand Motion's based. So she's one that if Tappa 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 and Shimmering Aspen and get hooked up and there's maybe some other speed and it sets up, Dancing Rags could come running late again.
Dancing Rags is the one I have my eye on from my quick look through the race. One that we've talked about a lot on this show since that big win in the Alcibiades last year.
But the rider changes allowed me to get off, so they made a switch, and so I joked with our friend Chris Pipito that it's kind of a relief that I don't have to root for her anymore.
Chris, of course, the jockey agent for Angel Cruz. Trevor McCarthy picking up the booking there. Let's move on to Preakness Day, gentlemen. Talk about yet another loaded card. We'll start off with the listed stake that goes as race 5, the very one. Oh, quick timeout, actually, before we dive into this. I don't even know if you know this, JK. I might be delivering you news here. For the first time in my knowledge, on Friday, DRF Tournaments is going to be doing an all Pimlico card. I don't know if the plan is to repeat that on Saturday. I'm hoping it is. There'll be the normal selection of races late in the afternoon, but you also, as an alternative, can start off early and play all Pimlico. What do you think of that idea?
I think it's great. I love the all track games. I know they did an all Keeneland opening weekend, so it's exciting. It's really cool when everyone's attention is on one track and you can kind of play along with them when it comes to the tournament. So it's definitely going to be interesting. I'm sure a lot of people will participate in that.
Big stuff going on Saturday on DRF Tournaments. You can buy in for $580 to the World Championship of Handicapping Grade 1 qualifier. 1 in 10 players will win their full $5,000 buy-ins to the $1 million no takeout finals. There'll be a lot of attention on that. A full slate of great action with live bankroll contests from coast to coast as well. Check it all out, tournaments.drf.com. All right, back to the very one. JK, is this a race you're interested in playing?
Absolutely. I'm going to use a little bit of animal appeal here. I love horses that are, especially in turf sprints, that are coming in fresh, because you see, horses work 5 furlongs all the time. I don't think that distance is something that really is challenging for them in terms of getting ready off of a break. And so horses coming in off a layoff going 5/8 is not a problem for me. Animal appeal has shown ability to get to the lead going quickly going 6 and to stay on. And I think that going 5 is not going to be any problem for him at all. And so I'm looking forward to an opportunity to play that horse in this spot, or her, excuse me.
Sean, anything you're interested in here?
Turf sprints for me are such a wild card, but I got a good friend who manages the Dars stable, and I think Euroboss is set up for a big run. Puts Julian Leperoux on, one of the best turf riders in the country. As far as numbers, fits, she's in form this year, having 3 starts, won once, and been on the board all three starts. I think Euroboss at 12-1 with Leparoux on is a play for me.
Let me ask you a general question about turf sprint handicapping, Sean. How do the tools that you use differ when it comes to these races that can often be so chaotic?
Well, the sheets help because I like to see, obviously, which way horses are going. I think turf sprints and sprinters in general, it's really tough for them to maintain form for a long period of time because I just think sprints take so much out of them. So as far as sheets, I like to see the trend which way they're going. But the other problem with turf sprints is a lot of times it's such a secular type of group of horses that really they all just run against each other all the time, and there's generally not one that is dominant. So that's why I find it so difficult with turf sprints.
That's well put about the idea of really trying to catch them on the uptick in form. Obviously, the Sheets methodology, very much known for being able to predict form cycle in that way. But you can do the same type of thing with your Beyer speed figures, especially if you're the type to keep trip notes in Formulator, where you might have a sense of when the effort was higher or lower based on how that figure was earned. Let's talk about race 7. It's the Chick Lang. Sean, we'll start with you on this one. Good-looking group here. 3 rules, recruiting ready, theory. Where did you land?
Boy, this is a tough race. I've got a little bit of Proforma. To me is a very interesting horse. That horse is doing well. He got kind of locked up in the fairgrounds quarantine there. So I know this kind of took their plans to the side a little bit. I'm obviously going to root for Theory. He does need to step back up and run a better number than he did last time out. He needed that race. Recruiting ready was so dominant in that performance down at Oaklawn and it looks like he's working phenomenally well. He's probably, to me, a standout in this race.
JK, where did you land?
I think a lot of people are going to fall for the 3 rules cutback trick, and it's not going to happen to me. Drawn down on the rail, cutting back from a mile and an eighth. It's like they run him at 7. Then how do you think they trained him in the morning to get him ready for a mile and 16th? Then how do you think they trained him in the morning to get him ready for a mile and an eighth? And now they're going to cut him back to 6 and drop him down in the rail against real sprinters. I think he's going to get shuffled back and get an awful trip. I'll look for him later in the year going 7/8 or going a 1-turn mile. But for me in this spot, especially with the money he's going to take, I'll pass. I'm going to use a little bit of Bobby Abu Dhabi. I think Peter Miller does a really good job with these types. I think the sprinters, we talked about this before, the sprinters out west, I typically lean on a little bit. And if you don't believe me about that, you can look at what Dre Fong did while I was standing there holding an AP Indian ticket in the Breeders' Cup dirt sprint. So, look, I think Bobby Abu Dhabi's sitting on one at a big price. He was entered in the race that Sean mentioned earlier that American Freedom won, and they decided to ship him out here. I thought his run at Santa Anita on the 16th was really good. It was an inside speed day, and he was coming wide on the outside, and I think that he'll run well in this spot at what looks like will be a big price. And who's riding better than Corey Lanery right now?
I want to underline something you said there about 3 rules, because there's a lot of angles that people automatically like, cutback being one that typically will always make a note of and view it typically as a positive. But you've got to view your cutbacks in the context of designing today's race. And I don't have numbers on this, but if you did an ROI study where you looked at the cutbacks who then projected to have a favorable pace situation as opposed to those that had either an inconclusive or negative pace situation next time, you're going to be a lot better off paying attention to the ones that project to get a favorable situation if you want to bet them next out. So I'm just glad you mentioned that as a potential reason to oppose 3 rules, despite the fact that it's certainly going to take an awful lot of money. Race 8 is the Murphy. This is one. This
is the one we're going to be. Yeah, go ahead. You got it, Pete. I'll let you roll with it.
Gotcha. Yeah. The horse, it's just a horse that we've already given so much airtime to on the podcast, and we've talked a lot about how visually impressive number 6 Yoshida was, breaking the maiden at Keeneland and looking like a stakes horse every inch. The stakes horse in the in the process there. Jonathan, is this a single and move on for you, or do you have further thoughts?
Well, I just need confirmation that he's got 4 legs, and if he's got 4 legs and there's a good reason why Jose Ortiz isn't on, then yeah, he's an absolute single. I said it, let's see, if April 9th was what was that, a Friday or Saturday? But whatever, 3 days later on the show, I said that this horse was something special. That race was impressive, and I think that he wins for fun if Sean confirms everything that I think to be true.
We're going to put you on the spot here, Sean.
Little backstory to Yoshida. Elliot Walden, our president and CEO, and Tom Ryan of SF, and Michael Walsh of China Horse Club, who we all race a large group of colts together every year. We're over in Japan and bought this horse as a foal. Just a lovely, beautiful horse. You know, I don't know if you remember Heart's Cry, but I still remember when he won in Dubai.
Sure.
The 1.5 mile race, and I still remember him being one of the most impressive turf horses I've ever seen run. Out of a really high-class filly, American filly, Hilda's Passion. Yoshida may be one of our top 3-year-olds we have in the stable this year, and I'm really excited to see this horse run. The Jose Ortiz, you know, jockeys have certain commitments they have to other stables. Can't hold them against it, but we get Joel Rosario, who I don't know if you remember last year, but he gave a great ride to Winstar horse when we won the Breeders' Cup Mile. Joel rides Good Samaritan, our other high-class 3-year-old turf horse in the stable, and it's hard to separate those two. So I'm really, really excited to see Yoshida. I think a cut back to a mile, I think he'll want more distance anyways, but he has plenty of speed, and I fully expect him to run a really big race.
Since you mentioned our friend Good Samaritan, just curious, any report of how he came out of the last race and what you're thinking in terms of his future?
He came out of the race really well. You know, he probably didn't quite like that soft going a little bit. And here's another thing to tie in. Let's be real. Arklow looks like he's going to be a really good turf horse this year. And Arklow, so when Yoshida won at Keeneland, there was 2 mile, 1 mile and an eighth races. They split the main special weight. Arklow won the other race that was the same day, and so I fully expect that day to produce 2 stakes winners.
Nice, I like it. Very good stuff. All right, let's move on to the 9th race. It is the Maryland Sprint. Sean, we'll start with you on this one. Where are you looking to go?
Man, this is going to be a hell of a race between I think Whitmore and AP Indian, 2 high-level sprinters. You know, we have horses, Arnaud Delacour, fantastic trainer. AP Indian's really good horse. The Commonwealth set him up really well for this spot. And Awesome Slew came back and ran a really good race, losing by a nose or a neck to Limousine Liberal. So I think, you know, looking back at the Commonwealth, that's going to be a really key race. I think 6 furlongs is probably what AP Indian wants anyway. 7 might be a tick too far for him. But the question for me is Whitmore's been so dominant down at Oaklawn this winter. It might be a little bit of a changing of the guard on the East Coast for a top sprinter, but I think it's between those 2.
JK, we had a question about Whitmore from a listener who was thinking he was potentially a good single in this spot and wanted some counsel from you if that was a good opinion.
I think that these are a lot of value to be had in spots like this when there's 2 horses that if 500 people play the pick 4, 496 of them are going to use both of these horses in this spot. And I think if you can just pick one of them, there's so much value you can inject into what you're doing. And that horse is going to be Whitmore for me. I love AP Indian. I love what he did last year. And obviously he's an impressive type of horse, and he's got nothing to be embarrassed about getting beat by Awesome Slew. And like you said, Limousine Liberal came back and won as well. But I think Whitmore is on to something big here. I think he's sitting on a big kind of coming out party for the national scene. Obviously, people know what goes on at Oaklawn, but all eyes will be on Pimlico, and I think that people will know that he's the best sprinter on the East Coast after this weekend.
That's a great point.
What about John?
Oh, you had something to add there, Sean?
Well, yeah. I just what do you make of Whitmore having to give AP Indian 6 pounds?
You know, I'm maybe I need to be better about it, but I don't typically get too caught up in the weight thing. I will when it's like an apprentice situation, when it's like a 10-pound spread on maiden horses, going 2 turns for the first time, stuff like that. But I typically, when it comes to stakes horses and in stakes races, I don't pay too much attention to it, and maybe to a fault. But it isn't something that I incorporate in my decision making.
Sean, I'll turn that question back on you. Horsemen traditionally pay a lot more attention to weight than American handicappers because of all the time I've spent looking at races over in the UK and Ireland. It's something that I am used to considering when looking at their races. But yeah, it's 6 pounds. It seems like it's significant, but maybe at 6 furlongs, maybe with horses as powerful as these, it's not something that I necessarily am going to factor in. But how do you see it, and how do most horsemen see it?
Well, you always want to get weight. When we enter horses, that's something we always take into account, is if we can get a weight break somewhere. I do think sprinting, it probably makes a little bit less of a difference than a 2-turn race. But really, I mean, when you're looking at these 2 high-level horses, I'm gonna take into account a little bit. I don't think it would stop me from going one way or the other, but I do think you have to take into account just a little bit here. And there's one time I remember was in the Delaware Oaks when Blind Luck had to give Hob de Grace 10 pounds and she got beat a nose.
Yep. At that point, it just seems logical that even on a 1,000-pound beast that's going to matter. I'd say in general for me, another thing about weight, and I don't know that I'm right about this, but it's just a sense I have. Dirt sprinting, it's so attritional, where so much of the running is done early. I feel like in that situation, it's maybe a little easier to overcome a smaller weight edge than on the turf, where more of the real running is happening when stamina has already come into play with those late bunched up finishes in turf races. For me in my handicapping, I feel like it matters more there. But I get what you're saying from a horseman's perspective. Like take every edge you can, even if it's a couple of pounds. I also, before we move on from this race, just wanted to highlight something else JK said from a wagering strategy standpoint that I think is really smart. When you want to make money at the racetrack, it's not about covering every possibility you think might happen. That's too conservative, and racing's too chaotic for you to make money when you're just trying to lock everything up every time. So it's absolutely okay to know a horse like AP Indian has a huge chance to win and say, you know what? Value-wise, long-term-wise, if I was able to make this play 100 times instead of just the one time I can make it today, I'd make more money just singling the one that I prefer and accepting the fact that my strike rate is going to go down, but my overall ROI is going to go up. And I think that's a good point and something that is a mistake I'll often make, getting too spready. And it's good to hear Jonathan pointing out what I think is the better option for our listeners today. Race 10 is the Gallarette. We've got fillies and mares, a mile and a 16th on the turf. Strong-looking group with some familiar names. Jonathan, where did you land?
In Chad we trust here. I guess that the shug makes a little bit of sense, but Chad, the Ulysses World and her races at Gulfstream and Tampa, to me, just lay over this field. You can even go back to the race at Gulfstream, and I just don't see how they're going to beat her. Chad will be ready to roll on a big day like this. He's not going to send out a short horse, even though she's coming off of a break, and I think that she kind of wins this race for fun. Trouble obviously can happen, but I'll bet that Joelle will keep her out of trouble. And I'll just single her as well.
Ulysses World for JK with a sort of a head fake towards picking as a secondary contender, number 6 On Leave for Shug McGahee. Sean, what do you think of this race?
I have to agree completely with Jonathan. I think looking at on form, I don't think the Dahlia, which was a prep race for this, was that strong of a race. So after that and looking at running lines, Dickinson looks like she could be maybe possibly the best older turf filly going right now. You know, Lady Eli's still out there, but Dickinson was able to beat her there at Keeneland. Alicia's World was within a half length of her at Tampa. So for me, it's all about Alicia's World here. Chad Brown is one of the premier turf trainers in America, and this filly's I think this could be a really impressive performance by her.
All right, race 11 is the Sir Barton, restricted stake for 3-year-olds, hedge fund appearing in here. It's been kind of interesting. Todd Pletcher, obviously, one of the greatest trainers around, and has the favorite in the race coming up a little bit later on the card. Not the smoothest of weeks for him. Sent out a bunch of runners. I've been paying mostly attention in New York. Some short price horses that haven't gotten it done. I'm wondering if this barn is just ready for an uptick here coming this weekend. Jonathan, where did you go in the Sir Barton, and what do you think, generally speaking, of a little bit of a rough streak for a trainer who is an all-world trainer?
Oh, I don't worry about Todd when it comes to down streaks. He'll be fine. He'll figure it all out. He's been figuring it out for 10 years successfully. I don't think he'll have a problem figuring it out now. One of the horses I'm interested in here is a horse that we've talked about before, and that's Watch Me Whip. Dale Romans was really high on the horse. I think that the DRF workout report might have thrown some people off a little bit. The horse wasn't working particularly well leading into that maiden win, but I know that he's always thought a lot of this horse, and I'm interested to watch this horse stretch out to 2 turns. And so, I trust Dale a little bit. I've always thought he was a good trainer. That horse was wide that day, super wide actually that day. And I think that he'll appreciate the extra ground being at a smart strike, and I expect him to run well on Saturday.
Sean, is that something that you've noticed before in the past? A horse maybe not super duper impressive in the mornings, but potentially because what the horse really wants to do is run farther, and stamina isn't as flashy as speed in workouts. Is that a thing?
Well, that is the case. You can have horses that wake up in the afternoon, but I do think Dale Romans is probably one of the best at keeping his horses a secret in the mornings. He's not a real flashy work trainer. They're not going to be real fast works. If you ever do see a bullet, that means that's a good one in his barn. He's nice, consistent maintenance works, and he generally runs one to get him fit. So in this case, I think this horse must have a world of talent. It's well bred. There's a horse in here, though. Obviously, I think Hedge Fund, our own horse, is sitting on a win. He was unlucky not to win at the Illinois Derby, but we'll get to the Illinois Derby when we start talking about the Preakness. But the horse I think that's really interesting, and I played in the Lexington, who was one of the most impressive winners at Gulfstream over the winter, is Time to Travel for Matt. They ran him back in 14 days when he broke his maiden, where he beat Caviar Czar, who came back and won on Derby Day impressively. Meantime, ran a really bang-up race last weekend in the Peter Pan, and he's getting first-time Lasix. He's getting Johnny V. Time to Travel is a horse for me that I think is really, really interesting in this spot.
I like it. Let's give a quick thought on the Dixie so we can spend a little bit of time talking about the Preakness. We got about 10 minutes left of the show. It's not a crazy rush, but I do want to make sure we don't give the Preakness short shrift. Is there a horse in particular you're interested to see run in the Dixie, Sean?
The horse Black Type I've always thought is a really good horse. He gets Jose Ortiz on there. I think that horse for me would be somebody I'm going to circle, and then of course Chad's horse looks like he could be anything.
All right, JK, where are you in the Dixie?
Yeah, would it be smart if I didn't use the Chad here? I'm going to use the Chad a little bit. I've always thought, we talked about it. I joked that Conquest Typhoon is one of my favorite horses because I saw him eat a donut one time. But I actually do like Conquest Typhoon in this spot. But I'm also not going to ignore Ring Weekend. Obviously, he's shown what kind of capabilities he's had. It wasn't going into the Breeders' Cup Mile very well. And I kind of forgive him for that. And I think that Graham, obviously, it's kind of his background being in Maryland. I think he'll run well as there as well. So Chad is definitely one that you're going to want to use with projected. I don't think Catapult is very likely in this spot, but I'll save a little bit with Conquest Typhoon and Ring Weekend.
I forgot about the donut story, though I know you have mentioned it before on the show. All right, now we're ready to talk about the main event. It's the Grade 1 Preakness. For a lot more on the Preakness, you can check out that handicapping session I had the pleasure of hosting last night with Andy Beyer and Andy Serling. You can find that on drf.com/YouTube. For me, I can't get away from the trip that Classic Empire had last time. The more I watch the race, the more I become convinced that that initial theory we spoke about, that for whatever reason in that race, those inside horses overperformed a little bit, and the outside horses typically underperformed a little bit, with the exception of Classic Empire, who also had two very notable spots of trouble to me. I don't know what we're going to be looking at in terms of price. I did see earlier this week there was still some 9-2 floating around for our UK and Irish listeners. I don't think you'll be seeing any 9-2 on the tote. I'm sort of thinking you might be seeing something more down in the 2 or 3-1 range. I can't get off him. That's where I'm going to land. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
I'm actually going to have to film a little out of the gate situation here in a little bit, and in my we submit kind of our replays that we want to use for that if we're going to use any. And the guy that I submitted to was a little bit confused when I told him that I wanted the 2007 Derby and the 2007 Preakness. And to me, it just feels like this race is going to come down to trip, and it's going to be the exact same thing that happened in 2007 with Street Sense and Curlin banging heads down the stretch. And I think Classic Empire is going to win that battle. I was against him. And when I say against him, I mean I didn't use him in my 8-horse super effective box that I did for the guys at my dad's work. I didn't use him defensively. I didn't use him at all. I completely tossed Classic Empire in the Derby. But the reasons that I tossed him there don't really exist here. I thought it was going to be a fitness thing. I thought he wasn't going to be fit enough and ready to do that. And obviously he will be now out of the 1.25 mile race. And we've heard Norm talk about it in interviews before that, he's kind of excited about the 2-week turnaround because now he doesn't have to worry about training this horse, who can be a little bit complicated at times. Just gallop him in the mornings, and fitness should be built in. So Classic Empire and Always Dreaming are going to knock heads down the stretch, and I think it's Classic Empire. I'm not falling for the Conquest Mo money thing. I get that horse might run 3rd or 4th, but if those two horses get a clean trips, he won't beat either one of them.
All right, strong opinion from JK there. I've noticed a lot of people talking about trainer stats coming back in 2 weeks as part of their reckoning of this year's Preakness. I would just caution against that. For me, the Derby Preakness wheelback is so much of its own thing that I don't think it's really relevant what a trainer typically does coming back in 2 weeks in this instance. That's just my opinion. I'm sure there's other people.
I completely agree. I think our friend Mike Hogan, who I'm sure is listening, was who made that stat. And if he was on today, my argument to him would be of those runners that have run back in 2 weeks, how many of them's previous start was going 1.25 miles as a 3-year-old?
Right. There's a lot.
It's a completely different situation.
A lot of different X factors, and trainer stats. It's one of those things that you can parse in a lot of different ways. Sean, you mentioned that you might have some points to make about the Illinois Derby before we launch into our discussion of the Preakness. You can start there, or wherever you want, really, with your thoughts on this year's race.
Well, looking at the race, the two-week turnaround with Todd Pletcher's stats wouldn't bother me at all here. It's not something he typically does, but how often do you ever have the 2-week turnaround from Derby to Preakness? It's very rare. This horse, Always Dreaming, to me, is when I see horses this time of year that are just blossoming and doing so much better than the rest, that's when they start to separate themselves. When Orb won the Derby, he touted himself that week. This horse, Always Dreaming, he's doing so good. He's crawling out of his skin coming into the Derby. He's doing great when I've seen him train over here at Pimlico in the mornings. And you're looking at his races, he's winning by 2 3/4, 5, 4. He could win by whatever he wants. I think he's going to get the perfect setup, perfect trip, and I fully expect Always Dreaming to win by 3 or 4 lengths.
Wow.
The thing with Classic Empire, he hasn't run back to his numbers as a 2-year-old. And for me, that's something to really take note of is for me, from 2 to 3, you've got to take that next step. And he's been competitive. He's won another Grade 1. But I'm going to be playing against Classic Empire here, which brings me to the one horse. Jonathan and I had many discussions Derby week while we watched horses train about the horse that ended up becoming the one horse, looking at Lee and horses who want to get the distance. I have no idea why multiplier's 30-1 on the morning line. This horse wants the distance. He's going to have a perfect trip from the one hole. I think you're going to see Hedge Fund, if not win, be extremely competitive on the undercard earlier in the day. You get Joel Rosario, who's a high-class jockey. And this horse, they wanted to get him on the Derby trail earlier in the year, but he's kind of a little slow to break his maiden. Was always competitive, and then really broke through and showed how good he was, beating Hedge Fund, who we're really high on in the Illinois Derby. And since the Illinois Derby, he's done phenomenally. He's been bought by a new connection, but stayed with Brendan Walsh, who's really a good young up-and-coming trainer. And his numbers have improved every single start. This horse, to me, is, I don't know if he can win, but he's going to run second, third, or fourth easily, I think, in my opinion.
A lot of confidence there and a big price. We love to hear that on the show. With Classic Empire, I totally get what you're saying. When you just look at the raw dope, when you're just looking at the numbers, no matter what scale of numbers you're using, you can make a case, and I think you were heading in this direction, Sean, that the horse maybe just hasn't trained on and hasn't improved since that BC Juvenile. But for me, I just feel like when you look at those individual races, you can tell yourself a story because of the training mishaps earlier in the year. Then finally, back on track in the Arkansas Derby, I feel like you can excuse that number being low based on the fact that, it's pretty hard to miss the kind of time that this horse missed and blossom. So I'm thinking he's doing that on talent alone, should move forward. Okay, so why is the number in the Derby low? I mean, to me, between the way the track was and the start, I just feel like I can give many, many links of trouble excuse that if you were looking at not a raw buyer number, but a number more representative of his ability, to me, it was kind of as impressive as his BC Juvenile win, and maybe he could take another step forward. Do you think, am I overblowing the trip, or do you think it's just a classic difference of opinion, agree to disagree on Classic Empire?
Well, I mean, look, I can agree with you 100% that he did not have at all a good trip, which he didn't have a good trip in the Arkansas Derby either. I mean, he's a horse that sometimes has to overcome trips. But you have to think that rough of a Derby and the swollen eye and the 4 or 5 days after the Derby, are we going to go? Are we not going to go? There's just a lot of question marks surrounding Classic Empire, and sometimes when I'm handicapping and when there's a lot of question marks, you have to think, how many times can this horse overcome it before he's kind of done with it? That's what my take on Classic Empire right now.
Certainly fair. And when you sometimes see a horse who has trouble breaking, that can be something that just happens every time, and it's certainly not going to help him here. I think part of the case for Classic Empire is him breaking a lot better and getting a nice trip from Classic Empire's perspective, hopefully seeing Conquest Mo Money be very aggressive, making things a little bit more difficult on Always Dreaming, and maybe getting a good toe into the race and pouncing in the stretch.
I don't know if you guys watched or were present at the draw, but I found it quite interesting that Mark Cassidy made a comment that Classic Empire could be on the lead too.
Yeah, I guess he has been a little sharper. That is very interesting. I mean, it would surprise me. I feel like the Conquest Mo Money path to victory is going straight to the front, but bring in JK on this one. What do you think of the pace scenario in here, Jonathan?
I think Julien Leparoux is one of the best front-end riders when he finds himself there. He doesn't typically get there. A lot of the reason being the way that he rides so conservatively, but when he ends up there, he's pretty damn good on the front end. And so if I had a bet on Classic Empire, I'd have no problem with him being on the front end. Now, look, I don't really want Todd and Always Dreaming sitting outside of him while he's on the lead. That's not ideal. But at least you eliminate all opportunities for for trouble, and he's shown that he can attend to the pace and put away good horses, and he did that in the juvenile. I'm a little bit where you are on this one, Pete, that if you go back through the PPs or you go up through the PPs, you can have excuse, Holy Bull excuse, Arkansas Derby short, Kentucky Derby, trouble, bad part of the track. So I can kind of get there a little bit with him, but I also can kind of, Sean's convincing me a little bit as well that, but he just keeps on not answering the question since that last race. And that can be a problem at times. And how long do you chase a horse that continuously finds a way to not answer the question? And that's something that you have to try to decide with Classic Empire. I think that the trouble and the trip were real, though, and the Derby. And I think the bias was real. And if this was a Wednesday at Aqueduct, this would be a dead single for me.
All right. We are out of time, gentlemen. We're going to know a whole lot more about this question and many others come 7 o'clock on Saturday night. I want to thank Jonathan Kinchin. I want to thank Sean Tugel for joining us today. Great insights, Sean. Hopefully, no good deed goes unpunished. We're going to have you back on the show soon. But we really appreciate your chiming in today. Want to thank everybody out there for listening. The DRF Players Podcast will be back next week on Tuesday with a recap of all the action. Until then, I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.